It all started with flashing red and blue lights outside my window at 6:30 in the morning. Half asleep, still in my pajamas, I squinted at the scene outside. 3 police cruisers idled on my gravel driveway, their lights bouncing off my house. I blinked, wondering if I had woken up in some alternate reality where I was a fugitive on the run. A knock pounded at my front door. No, not a knock, a hammering, like the cops were about to break it down. Still groggy, I yanked open the door, only to be met with a scowling officer, his hand resting on his holster. And standing right behind him, her arms crossed like she had just discovered a hidden criminal empire in my backyard, was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood. "Sir, step outside," the officer barked. "We got a call about trespassing and illegal occupancy." I blinked at him. "Trespassing? Illegal occupancy? Officer, this is my house. I own this land." Karen let out a dramatic gasp, clutching her chest like I had just told her I was the second coming of Satan. "He's lying," she shrieked. "I have personally reported this squatter multiple times. He does not belong here. He's defying our HOA regulations, and I demand you remove him immediately." I stared at her, then at the officer, then back at her again. Was this some kind of twisted prank? Was I on a hidden camera show? I had purchased this property legally, fair and square, and I was not part of any HOA. But Karen, with her perfectly permed hair, aggressively matching floral blouse and capri pants, and a face that seemed permanently set in an expression of judgmental rage, had apparently taken it upon herself to police the entire neighborhood. The officer, clearly not in the mood for early morning nonsense, sighed and pulled out his notepad. "Sir, do you have proof of ownership?" I resisted the urge to laugh out loud. "You mean proof that I live in my own house?" "Yeah, give me a second." I turned, walked inside, and grabbed my property deed from the filing cabinet. When I handed it over, Karen squawked like an offended parrot. "That could be forged," she shouted. The officer pinched the bridge of his nose. "Ma'am, please, let me handle this." But Karen was on a roll. "I've lived here for 15 years. I know every resident. This man does not belong here. He refuses to follow our HOA guidelines. His driveway is made of gravel. She said the word like it was a contagious disease. "Our community requires paved driveways. His front yard doesn't match the aesthetic. He has refused to pay HOA fees." I took a deep breath, realizing that I was dealing with someone who had fully detached from reality. "Karen," I said, as calmly as possible, "I am not in your HOA. My land was never part of it. The previous owner was never part of it. Your rules do not apply to me." "That's not how this works," she screeched. "You can't just opt out of an HOA. Actually," the officer said, skimming through my paperwork, "it says here that his property is legally separate from the HOA jurisdiction." Karen's mouth flopped open and shut like a fish gasping for air. Then, as if realizing she was losing control of the situation, she pointed a shaking finger at me. But he's ruining the neighborhood. His garbage bins were out for 20 minutes longer than allowed. His grass height is off by an inch. He has a garden hose in the front yard." The officer gave her a flat look. "Ma'am, these are not criminal offenses." Karen's face flushed red, her frustration boiling over. "So you're just going to let him get away with this? He's making a mockery of our rules. What's next? Letting people paint their doors whatever color they want? Park their own cars in their own driveways? Chaos. Absolute chaos." At that moment, her husband jogged up, looking like a man who had been dragged into one too many HOA battles. "Karen, come on," he muttered under his breath. "Let's go inside." "I will not," she snapped, yanking her arm away from him. "This is a matter of principle. If we don't stop him now, what's next? Unapproved mailboxes? Yard decorations that aren't HOA approved? Unregulated holiday lights?" The officer rubbed his temples like he was developing a migraine. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter." He turned to me. "Sir, I apologize for the inconvenience. You're free to go about your day." But Karen wasn't finished. She jabbed her finger into my chest. "This isn't over. We have bylaws. We have aesthetic standards. I will take this to the HOA board." I smiled at her. "Cool. Let me know how that works out for you." The officer sighed and motioned for his fellow officers to head back to their cruisers. As he climbed into his car, I heard him mutter under his breath, "I hate HOA disputes." I watched as Karen stood fuming on the sidewalk, her husband tugging at her sleeve, and I knew this was only the beginning. A week had passed since the first 911 call, and I had foolishly hoped that Karen might finally accept reality and move on. But of course, that was wishful thinking. Karen wasn't the type to let go of a grudge. She was the human embodiment of a dog with a bone, except the bone was my existence, and she was determined to chew on it until I either moved out or bent to her ridiculous HOA rules. Rules that, once again, did not apply to me. The first sign that things were about to escalate came when I stepped outside one morning and found a bright orange violation notice taped to my front door. The paper practically screamed at me in bold, capitalized letters. "You are in violation of HOA guidelines. Failure to comply will result in fines and legal action." I actually laughed out loud, because it was just so absurd. There was no legal standing behind this. It was nothing more than Karen and her HOA cronies trying to flex their imaginary authority over me. I crumpled the paper and tossed it into the trash, thinking that would be the end of it, but of course it wasn't. That same afternoon, as I was bringing groceries inside, I heard a loud beeping noise from outside. When I turned around, I saw a tow truck backing into my driveway, heading straight for my car. For a moment, I was too stunned to react. Then, like a switch had been flipped, I sprinted outside, waving my arms. The tow truck driver, a burly guy who looked like he had seen his fair share of fights, rolled down his window and barely looked at me as he muttered, "HOA complaint. They said this vehicle is parked in violation of community guidelines." I gaped at him. "This is my driveway. I own this land. The HOA has no jurisdiction here." The guy sighed, clearly not in the mood for a debate, and gestured toward the clipboard sitting on his dashboard. "Look, lady from the HOA called this in, gave me the address, said it was unauthorized. I don't care about the politics. I just move cars." Before I could even process the insanity of what was happening, Karen came marching down the sidewalk, clipboard in hand, her smug expression making my blood boil. "Oh, good you're here," she chirped at the tow truck driver. "This vehicle is unauthorized and must be removed immediately." I stepped between her and my car, heart pounding with sheer disbelief. "Karen, you can't tow my car. This isn't HOA property," she scoffed, flipping a page in her clipboard as if she were reading scripture. "According to HOA parking regulations, all vehicles must be registered with the association and parked in designated areas. Your car is neither." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my cool. "Karen, I am not in your HOA." She gave me the kind of fake sympathetic look you'd give a child who just didn't understand the rules of a game. "That's not how this works," she said, as if explaining something incredibly obvious. "You live in this neighborhood. That means you follow HOA rules." I turned to the tow truck driver. "If you touch my car, I'll have you arrested for trespassing and attempted theft." That seemed to get his attention. He hesitated, looked between me and Karen, and finally muttered, "Look, I'm not getting involved in this mess." He threw his truck into reverse and drove away, leaving Karen standing there, red-faced and fuming. "This isn't over," she snapped. I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, you said that last time." I thought that was the end of her nonsense for the day, but I had underestimated just how far Karen was willing to take this. That night, around 10 p.m., I was lounging on my couch watching TV when I saw something strange through my window, flashlights. Multiple. Moving around my property. My stomach dropped. I shot up, grabbed my phone, and stepped onto my porch, ready to confront whoever was trespassing on my land. And that's when I saw them. 3 men in reflective vests, spray cans in hand, painting bright white lines across my yard. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. One of them, a middle-aged guy with a tired look on his face, straightened up and squinted at me. "HOA sent us. Said this property needs to be measured and marked for community sidewalk expansion." I stared at him in disbelief. "There is no community sidewalk expansion. This is my property. You're trespassing." The guy looked genuinely confused. "They said it was HOA land." Before I could even begin to formulate a response, Karen appeared once again, marching down the sidewalk like some kind of unhinged general leading her troops into battle. "Oh, stop making such a fuss," she huffed. "We're simply marking the land for improvements. You're lucky we're even including your property in this." I clenched my fists, feeling my patience slip away. "Karen, I swear, if you step one more foot onto my land, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." She scoffed, clearly unimpressed by my threat. "You wouldn't dare." I pulled out my phone and started dialing. Her smugness cracked for just a second before she quickly turned to the workers. "Stop for now," she ordered, voice tight. "We'll revisit this later." The workers, looking relieved to be out of the middle of whatever this mess was, packed up and left. Karen lingered, staring at me as if she could somehow intimidate me into submission. Finally, she turned and stormed off, muttering under her breath about ungrateful residents who don't appreciate good leadership. That was when I realized something crucial. Karen wasn't just a nuisance. She wasn't just an annoying busybody who had too much time on her hands. No, Karen was obsessed. She had fully convinced herself that she was the queen of this neighborhood, and I was some sort of rebellious subject refusing to kneel. And if she had already escalated things this far, I knew this was only going to get worse. It had become a full-blown war. Karen was relentless, and at this point, it felt like she was dedicating every waking moment of her life to making mine a living nightmare. Every day brought a new absurdity, a new letter taped to my door, a new ridiculous complaint, and sometimes another call to the police. But the moment I knew she had completely lost her grip on reality was when I walked outside one morning and found a for sale sign planted in my front yard. It was professionally printed, complete with a realtor's logo, and in bold letters, it read HOA property, for sale by order of the board. I nearly choked on my coffee. For a second, I actually wondered if I was dreaming, if I had woken up in some sort of surreal alternate dimension where Karen had successfully annexed my property through sheer delusion. But when I looked across the street, I saw Karen standing there with her arms crossed, smiling in that insufferable way that told me she truly believed she had won. I stormed over, the sign still in my hand, my voice barely restrained. "Karen, what in the actual hell is this?" She let out an exaggerated sigh, as if I were a misbehaving child she had to deal with. "I told you from the beginning, this is an HOA community, and you are required to follow our guidelines. Since you have refused to comply, the board has decided to take appropriate measures to transition your property into the community properly." I stared at her, trying to wrap my head around the sheer insanity of what she was saying. "Karen, you can't just put my house up for sale. I own this land. I own this house. You and your HOA have absolutely no legal authority over me." Her smirk didn't falter. "Oh, we'll see about that. Our lawyer has reviewed the situation, and we believe we have grounds to claim your property under eminent domain. You are a non-compliant resident, and as such, your property will be better utilized under HOA oversight." I had to take a deep breath to keep myself from laughing hysterically. "Karen, that is not how eminent domain works. That is not how anything works." She shrugged as if the details didn't matter. "Regardless, I suggest you prepare to vacate. We've already lined up interested buyers." That was it. That was the moment I decided I wasn't just going to sit back and tolerate her madness anymore. I had been patient. I had tried to ignore her. But this This was an act of war. I turned on my heels, stormed back inside, and did what I should have done a long time ago. I called my lawyer. And as soon as I explained the situation, he laughed. Not just a chuckle, but a full, deep, almost disbelieving laugh. "Oh, this is going to be fun," he said. Within 2 days, a cease and desist letter was drafted and delivered straight to Karen's doorstep. I made sure I was sitting on my porch when she received it, watching as she opened the envelope, read the contents, and promptly turned a shade of red I had never seen before. She marched across the street, waving the letter like it was a personal insult. "You think this is going to scare me?" she screeched. "I have dealt with difficult residents before. You don't intimidate me." I sipped my coffee, calm as ever. "Karen, that is a legally binding document. If you continue to harass me, you'll be seeing me in court." Her eyes narrowed. "Fine. If that's how you want to play it." And just like that, she turned and stormed off, and I knew that I had officially backed her into a corner. But I underestimated just how far Karen was willing to go. Because 3 days later, I woke up to find a construction crew in my front yard, ripping out my driveway. I ran outside in my pajamas, my voice rising to a level I wasn't used to. "What the hell are you doing?" One of the workers barely looked up from his machine. "HOA ordered renovations." I saw red. "This is my property. You are trespassing. Stop right now." One of the men hesitated, clearly unsure, but before he could make a decision, Karen came power-walking onto the scene, clipboard in hand. "Oh, don't be so dramatic," she snapped. "Your gravel driveway is an eyesore. We are simply making necessary improvements to ensure compliance with HOA regulations." I pulled out my phone and, without another word, called the police. When they arrived, I calmly explained that an unauthorized construction crew was illegally demolishing my private property under false pretenses. The officers took one look at the situation and immediately shut everything down. But Karen? She had the audacity to act as if she was the victim. "This is harassment," she wailed. "I am only trying to uphold the standards of this community." The officer gave her a deadpan stare. "Ma'am, you are the one trespassing on his property. I suggest you leave before this escalates further." She let out a strangled noise, but for once, she actually backed down. The workers packed up, the driveway remained half destroyed, and Karen disappeared inside her house, no doubt plotting her next move. But she had finally crossed a line she couldn't come back from. Because my lawyer wasn't just filing one lawsuit, he was filing multiple. Harassment, property damage, false claims. The court date came faster than I expected. Karen showed up in a pantsuit that looked a size too tight, clutching her clipboard as if it was a holy relic. She barely made it 10 minutes before the judge cut her off. The evidence was overwhelming. The police reports, the letters, the video footage I had taken of the construction crew, everything pointed to one thing. Karen was a liability. The judge ruled in my favor almost immediately. Karen was ordered to pay for the damages to my property, cover my legal fees, and issue a formal cease to all harassment. But the real kicker? The HOA itself was also held financially responsible for allowing her actions to go unchecked. That meant every member of the HOA was about to see an increase in fees because of her reckless obsession. By the time the ruling was announced, Karen looked like she was about to explode. But the final nail in her coffin came when one of the other HOA board members stood up, clearly fed up, and announced, "That's it. We're voting you out." Karen's face contorted into a look of absolute horror. "You can't do that. I am the HOA." "No, Karen," the board member said, shaking his head. "You were." And just like that, it was over. Karen was removed from the HOA, and within a week, she put her house up for sale. I watched from my porch as the for sale sign went up, not on my property, but on hers. She had spent so much time trying to drive me out, and in the end, she was the one who had to leave. As her moving truck pulled away, I couldn't help but smile. I took a deep breath, savoring the sweet, sweet taste of victory. And then, just for fun, I went inside and ordered the biggest, most obnoxiously bright pink mailbox I could find. Just because I could.